Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How Competition Drives Mobile Game Performance. My name is Lily with Skillz, and I will be your moderator today. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to Evan James, Head of Product Marketing here at Skillz.
Hi guys, very excited to dive into this really interesting topic. Really looking forward to it.
So on the agenda today, we have 35 minutes to cover our topics on Fairplay and demographic targeting. We'll also go through some history on competitive mobile gaming. And after that, we have 10 minutes with Evan for a Q&A session. All right, a few things to note. All participants will be muted throughout the duration of the presentation to ensure the best audio quality for all. During the presentation, if you encounter any audio issues, please refresh your browser and check your computer's audio settings. Again, don't forget to submit your questions anytime during the webinar. Just click the chat button to do so, and this is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Lastly, we're also recording today's webinar, and we'll share the link with our follow-up emails, so that way you can listen to it again and even share it with others who may be interested. So in order to, before we get started, let's give a quick poll for everybody. We just like to know, do you have a mobile game developed, so we can kind of see the content that Evan should focus on today and just kind of give us a guideline about our audience. So great. It looks like some people actually do have a mobile game developed, and most of you guys are considering building one. So we hope that today's webinar you find engaging and it will help you decide to cross the line and actually create one. With that, now it's time to hear from Evan. So he'll be speaking on Fairplay and demographic targeting. And go ahead, Evan, take it away.
Thanks, Lily. So my name is Evan, and I'm the Head of Product Marketing here at Skillz. It's my pleasure to be speaking with you guys. A little bit about me. I'm a Bay Area native, and I've spent most of my professional career actually in the SaaS industry. Joined Skillz a little bit under a year ago, and one of the really exciting things for me personally as a product marketer working at Skillz is that the way that our monetization strategy works here at Skillz is we're really focused on making sure that you guys are successful and have a highly efficient and effective monetization strategy with your games. And it's essentially a partnership. It's if you guys are performing well and your game is generating revenue, growing DAU, all of those things, it's a success for us as well. And on the other hand, if it's not working for you guys, it's not a success for us. So one of my kind of key parts of my role when working with all of you guys is to make sure that you have the tools that you need to be able to download our SDK, go through the integration process, get live with the Skillz-powered game, become cash-enabled, and really start monetizing on your game. So this is a really cool opportunity for me personally in really making sure that you guys have all the tools that you need to have. And that brings us to the topic that we're talking today. One of the things that we've really noticed during our time at Skillz is there are certain games that particularly work well, and those are the games that really embody competition. So they're competitive games, and they have every aspect of fair play, and demographic targeting is working really well as well. So that's why we've chosen this topic. This is a part 1 of part 2 webinar. So we will, during this webinar, kind of go into laying the groundwork for this overall series. We're going to start with going through the history of competition. I'm going to look at chess and backgammon, as those are games that have existed for thousands of years and still retain a very large audience. And so there's a lot to learn from there. And then we want to go into looking at a little bit into what changed in the digital era. How have video games evolved over time? We're going to take a look at that from a mobile perspective, from a PC, a console perspective. And then want to switch gears a bit and talk about the demographics of competitive gaming. So really, who is playing different types of games, whether it's on PC or console or on mobile. There are some differences there, so we're going to jump into that. And the last thing is, how are competitive gaming and demographics tied to performance? Definitely want to leave you guys with a couple of things in terms of some key KPIs that we've seen. And then it's a good transition into part 2 of the webinar, which you should definitely stay tuned for, which will be focused on how competitive gaming impacts engagement rates, revenue rates, and overall game monetization. So cool. So before we jump into everything having to do getting started with the history, there are really 3 main pillars that make up competition in general. This is whether it's a digital game or an analog game, but we've noticed that these 3 things are really the essence of any competitive game. The first one is making sure that you have competition against real-world players. So having that competitive spirit of a game of where you're competing as one player against another player or as a team against another team, making sure that you have that competition in a real world setting is critical. It's one of the basic elements of what makes for competition. So, you know, there are other ways that you can compete. You could compete against an AI, but what we've seen, generally speaking, unless if you're like a grandmaster of chess, and you would get a huge thrill out of beating, you know, one of the AI components that, like, you know, opponents that is incredibly challenging to beat. But for the average player, they're really looking at, you know, making sure that they can compete against another real-world player. The second part is fairness and matchmaking, and those really, you know, they could even be broken up. They're 2 kind of separate things, but starting with fairness, if you think about soccer for a moment, you have a game in which essentially one team is trying to score more goals than the other team. But in addition to that, there's all sorts of different rules. So only the goalie can touch the ball with their hands. The ball can't go outside. And you can't just tackle somebody in the same way that you can in football. You can slide tackle, but you can't just wrap your arms around them and bring them to the ground. And to enforce all those different rules, you have a referee, and that's really what makes a game fair. If you didn't have those rules and a way of enforcing it, it wouldn't be a fun competition whatsoever. Think of soccer in which there were no rules. It basically wouldn't be a game. Or think of soccer in which one team didn't have to adhere to the rules while the other team did have to adhere to the rules. It wouldn't be a fair game. So making sure that there's fairness in your game is one of the critical parts to really holding some sort of competitive game altogether. The second part of that is matchmaking. Matchmaking is really about making sure that you are putting 2 players of relatively equal skill up against each other. Again, you know, if you're thinking about soccer, it wouldn't be fun for a professional player or a professional team to play against an amateur team. It wouldn't be fun for the amateur team. It wouldn't be fun for the professional team. So really making sure that you have the ability to match up players of equal skill level is critical for having a competitive game. And we'll jump into that a little bit. That's something that Skillz actually has an algorithm to make sure that when you go live with the Skillz-powered game, we're able to do the player matchmaking so that players of equal skill are able to compete with each other, and it's a fun and fair game. The last part of that is a competitive hub. So if you're looking at a professional sport, you know, think of this as a place where, you know, teams would come to compete at a stadium or during a tournament, and being able to compete against all the other players that are of a relatively equal skill. If you're not a professional and you're playing a sport, that would be looking at, like, okay, where do I go to play other players of equal skill, whether it's a pickup basketball game being held out on a court, or, you know, you're a tennis player and you want to join a club so that you can find other players, discover other players to play with, and hold that competition. In the digital way, this is being able to host something which a high number of daily active users are looking and competing for that game, so that there isn't a scenario where a player is just constantly searching for another player to compete against. This can range from, having just a high number of players within a game, but it can also range within finding a larger ecosystem. And so one of the things that Skillz has is we have 18 million players that are consistently looking for new games and titles to compete on. And we basically, in essence, bring that competitive hub for you. So those are the three pillars of competitive gaming. I'm a bit of a history nerd, and I am very excited because I love both chess and backgammon. I've been playing pretty much my entire life. So we're going to just jump into a little bit of the history here, mainly because there's a lot of key things that you can take away from it. So starting with chess, chess was founded in the 6th century in India. You saw early elements of the game spread throughout the Middle East. You had different kind of pieces that were used, different variations of the board, but essentially it was, you could see a lot of the early stage elements of what is chess today. And then in the 11th century, it spread to Europe, and in the 16th century in Italy and Spain, you really saw the modern pieces and modern strategy come together. You have basically the same board, the same pieces, and the same gameplay that you have today. There have been small variations here and there, but generally speaking, if you were to travel back in time to the 16th century, you could compete in chess in a relatively similar fashion as you could today. And why is that important? Chess.com alone has 25 million members, and that's not taking into account all of the different people that are competing offline or on other websites. I myself I compete fairly regularly against my father or a friend, and those matches aren't being played. So the amount of overall chess players in the world is incredibly high, and this is key because if you think about it, over 5 centuries, the game has basically stayed the same, but you still have high levels of engagement and you still have high levels of player retention where players are wanting to compete in that game. The game hasn't changed, but players are still there. And this is even more impressive when you think about backgammon, which was founded in the Middle East nearly 5,000 years ago, which is just an incredibly long time. But if you look at the chessboard there on the left, and then you look at the one on the center, and then if you look at the image on the right, you can see that it's pretty much the same board. And generally speaking, over time, there have been very few changes in gameplay. Why is that so cool? Is that players are still going to play backgammon in a similar fashion, and it's a unique game that offers the same level of competition as it did 5,000 years ago. Players are really retained within that, and they've really been able to play that game in a similar way and find it engaging and fun, and every game is new. Still an interesting fact is if you go to the Middle East and go into a cafe, currently you'll often see players engaging in backgammon. It's still just a game that is incredibly popular today. And so one of the things that you can kind of see when it comes to the history of video games is a lot of those game developers in the analog sense of the version had really honed in on what is a good competitive game. And early video game developers with Pong were basically replicating that analog experience into a digital way. So in Pong, you had 2 players competing against each other, trying to score more points, get the ball past their opponent's blocker. And this experience is essentially just a very simple competition with very few rules, but they had to be adhered to. You had to have 2 players. This changed a little bit in the 70s and 80s with the rise of arcade games. So with arcade games, of course, you could have a multiplayer situation, but generally speaking, the best arcade players were practicing on their own. So they were honing in on their skills and getting better at their own games, in addition to having more of an experience where there was a unique map and the players were trying to achieve certain objectives. And these objectives were something that were unique from one game to another. So what that kind of changed into was you no longer had the same sort of competitive aspect to the game. And you saw that continue into the 90s, game like Zelda, Grand Theft Auto, where it's fully single-player games that are really trying to move through a map, achieve objectives, increase their skill, but they weren't benchmarking that against other players. Of course, you had multiplayer games during the time, but generally speaking, you saw more and more of these kind of single-player games. That changed in the early thousands, introduction of kind of World of Warcraft and those types of games where you had, kind of everything coming onto the internet, and all of a sudden you could host competitions where players could compete from all over the world onto a single map. And they still had the ability to increase their skill, achieve objectives, but they were also competing against other players. And I put in Dota 2 because I really wanted to drive home the point of what happened to Dota 1 when Dota 2 came about. So if you were to think about the number of daily active users on Dota 1, you saw kind of, the game's launched, you started to see early bits of players going in, and then as the game increased in popularity, you saw the number of DAO drastically increase. And you hit this point where it was incredibly popular. I believe it was the most popular game at one point, and they were all players were competing. There was a really high number of daily active users, but then due to the fact that the game is really reliant on a particular map, you start to see players slowly drop off over time. So your retention rates are starting to go down a little bit over time. And the game developer realized, okay, we want to be able to maintain our player levels. We probably can't do it just with our existing game because players are going to new games. So why don't we introduce Dota 2? So all the development resources go into it, the marketing hype, you launch the game, and what you would see with the daily active users of Dota 1 when Dota 2 is launched is a sharp decrease. So a lot of the players that were previously playing on Dota 1 have now migrated into Dota 2. Now the reason of bringing up kind of those things is game developers generally struggle with keeping content fresh. So you have to constantly be iterating on your game, and this is something that is incredibly resource heavy. There's two types of iterations that game developers can do. The first type is sort of over-the-air iteration in which you can introduce new characters. You can change settings to a current or existing character. You can introduce new skills. You can change minor things with the map, those types of things. And these things are resource heavy and do change the gameplay experience because a player that has been playing with one character and it's really honed in on the skills and the different types of abilities that a particular character have to change what they're doing and relearn a little bit. So that's something that just generally changes a player's perception of the game. The second type of iteration is even more resource heavy, and that's basically introducing a brand new title. So in the instance of Dota 1 to Dota 2, you had great sort of brand recognition of Dota 1, and so the game developer decided, you know what, we don't want to slowly lose our players over time. Let's build off the momentum that we had with Dota 1 and introduce a new version of the game with a new map, new characters. A lot of the same elements of the game are similar, but overall it's a completely new video game. And that's incredibly resource heavy. So obviously you have to spend all the time of having game developers, game designers, product managers going into actually developing the game, and then you need to hype it up. You need to make sure that that marketing resources are going to building up enough hype so that players come to the game at an early level, especially with something like Dota 2 where you're really reliant upon having a high number of players within the game. And then, of course, you have to focus on player acquisition, and player acquisition generally costs money, whether you're using paid advertising or traditional advertising of any sort or general marketing. All these things cost money and are resource heavy. And you don't really see, the reason I'm bringing that up is you don't really see the same issue when it comes to multiplayer competitive games. So going back to kind of the chess example, chess.com has, of course, made small UI improvements to what their game experience is like. But generally speaking, from 2005 till today, the game is still the same, and it goes back even farther with chess. And you don't necessarily see the same type of retention curve that you would see with something where it's a unique map with specific objectives, in which players will come onto the game, they'll get really hyped on it, but then they're probably going to look for some new form of content. With multiplayer competitive games, that's not really the case. So those are just kind of some of the things that, to think about when you're thinking about developing a type of game is what am I focused on? Am I focused on really driving up a short amount of engagement of highly engaging player base, or do I want a game that is going to retain my players over time with a longer term monetization strategy? So shifting gears a little bit and thinking about the demographics of esports. If you take a look on the left-hand side, you see that image of the top games awarding prize money. You have Dota, you have Counter-Strike, you have League of Legends, StarCraft, and Fortnite. And I'm not going to make you close your eyes or anything of the sort, but just take a moment and really reflect on what do you think that demographic of that player is. So if you are thinking about it, what does a gamer profile look like to you? What type of equipment are they using, etc. And my personal perception would be, I'm thinking of a younger male that is using some level of expensive equipment, whether it's a high-end PC with additional add-ons, maybe has a headset, those types of things, or they're using a decently expensive game console. And that means that the types of games that you're really trying to produce are not necessarily limited to, but in some ways limited to a certain player demographic. It's focusing on developing a game where the player is probably younger, more likely to be male than female, and has access to a certain type or a certain level of console or PC. And so that's why you see a lot of the games focused in that area. But one of the cool things that's changed with player demographics of video games was the introduction of mobile. So a quick note, if you take a look on the right-hand side image, it's generally just a great time to be in mobile gaming. You can see the market has increased steadily from 2016 to 17 in terms of the share of the market, and those trends are going to continue, during the next year in 2019, and most likely will continue in 2020 as well. And basically, you're seeing a larger and larger market share of mobile versus PC or console. A lot of the players that are currently playing on PC or console are migrating over into the mobile area. There are nearly 2.7 billion individuals with a smartphone, which means that the overall TAM or total assured market of a mobile game is much larger than a console game or a PC game, in which there's a much smaller amount of individuals that own a console or own a PC and are looking to participate in some sort of video game. So this has generally changed the demographics of gaming. Generally speaking, mobile games are just way more accessible. You have a much more diverse player demographic that's looking to go and play those games. So you don't necessarily need to, really think, okay, I want to create a game that's more focused on the player demographics of a young male that has access to a high-end console or PC, but instead it's, what type of player demographic do I want to have? And I have a much wider option for developing a type of game. And this has really led to a trend of a much more diversified genre type. You saw the introduction of fast casual games, which are highly popular on mobile. You still have hardcore games, you have midcore, but generally genres run the gamut from all different types of games that are trying to engage fast casual or the hardcore gamer or the mid-core all on mobile. It just has really widened the amount of games and types of games that you can have on that platform. One thing having to do with sort of demographics is, we make sure to ensure fairness within the game. There's a self-test that you guys have when you're coming to Skillz and integrating the game, where you can check early on, is my game fair? And then when you are going to be cash enabled, we run your game through an algorithm which determines, is this game more skill-based versus chance-based, as we only really support skill-based games that are 65% more skill than chance. And is the game fair? Is it free of not allowing one type of player to be able to outperform the other type of player? And the second thing is that we hold matchmaking. So we make sure that players are able to compete against each other with relatively equal skill. You don't see a beginner player playing somebody who's playing the game every day for the past 365 days. The second type of thing is relating to sort of player demographics and types of competitions that are held. Is different types of player demographics want to compete in different ways. So Skillz offers both cash tournaments, where a player that really wants to compete for cash can compete in that way, but we also have virtual currency, so that players that don't want to compete for cash are able to compete for the thrill of the game and to try and acquire Z, which is our virtual currency. And also in terms of sort of tournament types, we have head-to-head brackets, we have head-to-head matches, you have bracketed tournaments. You also have a leaderboard where you can see for the top players, where do I rank up against all other players within a game, so that players really know, okay, this is how I stack up. My skill level is here versus other players' skill level is here. Excuse me. So moving a little bit into the demographics of competition, Quantic Foundry put out a really interesting study which looked into all the different motivations of a gamer. Why do gamers choose to play a particular game? They looked at 12 different main characteristics and saw that competition was the second one. And the reason why is that it has a clear sense of mastery. So similar to like a single player game such as Grand Theft Auto, where a player is able to achieve objectives and they notice that their skill level is getting better as they're able to achieve those objectives. In a competitive game, you have the same sense of mastery. Okay, I'm able to compete in this game, and right now, for instance, in chess, I'm a 900 player, but if I was to play every day, I would be able to, and I probably right now wouldn't stand a chance against a 1400 player, but if I played every day, I would slowly work towards that. I would steadily get better at the game. So that sense of mastery is really keen, and it's very much aware in a competitive game. The second thing is you're able to benchmark yourself against other players. So again, if you're thinking about kind of a skills game, exactly where you rank in terms of skills based on where you are in the leaderboard. In addition, we also have a player skill level within a game. So any player that's participating on a particular genre knows, like, okay, my skill level is here, and if I continue to compete more and more, I'll even get better, and I'll move to a new skill level. We also have that across all skills games, as many of our players play multiple titles, so they know, okay, across all different skills games, here's where I rank up against all different types of skills competitors. Skills players. And then one other really interesting thing when it comes to sort of competition and demographics is when you look at gender and age. So if you look at sort of who is interested in competition at a younger age, it does skew more male. There are more younger males that are interested in competition than females, but age is really what is the most impactful sort of demographic to look at. And generally speaking, as men and women both grow older, you start to see the interest in competition really level out. So you have older females and males that are equally interested in participating in a competition. And actually, if you look at kind of Skillz overall, the top 10 Skillz players that we had in 2017, we'll be looking at 2018 shortly as we're close to the end of the year. But the top 7 out of the 10 were female. And generally speaking, if you were to look at sort of all demographics, player demographics across all of our different Skillz games, it varies from game to game, but we have about a 50-50 split in terms of males and females that are competing on Skillz titles. So the point of all of looking at demographics in this way is when you're a game developer, you don't necessarily need to be limited to thinking about what type of what type of player demographic should I focus on, and doesn't need to necessarily be like a game that is going to highly engage younger male players, but really it's more like what type of games have I developed in the past and I have an existing audience for and want to continue to build out on that audience. You can really open the gamut in terms of socioeconomic background, gender, age, location. There's a wide range of different types of players that are playing Skillz games, but just generally mobile games overall. So really, you're not limited to the same genre or game type that you would be limited to if you were looking at a PC or console. So one of the, as we were talking about, one of the key things that Skillz ensures is sort of tournament fairness and matchmaking. I alluded to the fact that we make sure to only support games that are 65% or more skill-based, and we have an algorithm to really make sure that all games that are cache-enabled fall into that category. So when you launch a game with Skillz and you get to the $100 threshold where you can then turn on cache enablement, we run a fairness check. So we're looking at A, is the game skill-based, and B, is it fair? You have ways of checking that earlier, so there's no surprises. And if there was something where you were close to having a skill-based game and you just needed to make some minor tweaks, we would definitely work with you to make sure that happens. But generally, it's one of the key components to ensuring that every game embodies the essence of a competitive game, which is that the game is skill-based, you can get better at it, and that it's fair. And on the second part, on the matchmaking side of things, what's key there is we make sure that engagement rates among new players are strong by matching them up against other players of equally similar skill levels. We don't want a new player coming in and just getting crushed by a player that's been playing for a long amount of time and knows how to play the game really well. So we generally make sure that all players are playing with other players within a certain skill level, that they're in the same kind of skill brackets. So that's just one thing on kind of how we ensure tournament fairness and matchmaking, and as a game developer, just making sure that you're thinking about that as you're developing a game. For anybody that mentioned, you're currently developing the game right now, it's something to keep in mind. And the last thing that Skillz holds is really a competitive hub. So as mentioned earlier, we have 18 million players that are coming to Skillz and looking for a wide range of titles to compete on. You have certain players that are more interested in card type games. You have others that are interested in match threes, puzzle games. We also have endless runners. We have a wide range of genre types that players are coming to look and compete on. And they come because they know the competition is fun and fair. It's free of cheating and fraud. They have the ability to have a single user profile and wallet so that they can just enter in their preferred credit card or connect Apple Pay and then play in all different types of Skillz titles. And they also know that they'll have a solid competitive game. They'll be ranked up against other players of similar levels. And we see that a number of different game developers come and work with us, which really is what makes the Skillz experience unique, is that we do have a very wide range of genres that are on our system, and allows for our players to discover lots of them. And they're on both Apple and Android, so there's no limitation in terms of the device type there. And this is something that really allows for us to have that competitive hub. And when you launch a game with us, you have the ability to have players compete on this competitive hub for virtual currency, for cash, whatever it is that they choose. So why are fair play and demographics so important for creating a successful game? Generally, fair play is one of those key 3 pillars for how you create a competitive game. And the second thing is knowing your demographic target audience is the first step in creating a successful UA strategy. So knowing, okay, like who is my game going to be tailored for when developing that game is incredibly important. So not just thinking about demographics after you launch the game, but thinking about it during the entire kind of development process. And both of these things are key for higher engagement rates, retention rates, and game monetization, which is a quick plug for why you should definitely join part 2 of this competitive gaming webinar, where we're going to look at that in detail. It's like, how do competitive games engage their players, retain their players, and how can you monetize off them? So this is something definitely that I hope that you'll join into. We're going to leave you with a couple stats there. But before doing that, just want to take a quick poll to see if you would like us to automatically register you for part 2 in this webinar, so that you can understand what is the engagement, retention, and monetization rates amongst competitive gamers. And cool, it looks like a number of you are saying yes to that. So we'll make sure to register you and keep an eye out for emails for part 2 of the webinar. As a quick kind of teaser for that, some of the things that we've seen is that generally competitive games monetize up to 6 times better than single-player games, and players play twice as long as single-player games. So, generally you have the monetization side of things. Competitive games are incredibly profitable from that perspective, and also you just see players that are willing to play the game for a much longer time than if they were just to play against themselves. So just another quick reason, if you are thinking about creating a competitive game, here's the reason why to create a competitive multiplayer game, is that you will know that you'll have high levels of engagement, monetization, and a good probability of high levels of engagement, retention, and monetization. Generally, Skillz has awarded $300 million in tournament prizes. So this is something that really brings kind of the VIP players to the table. They know that they can compete for cash and get real-world prizes. It's something that really brings players to the table, so that it's just a different form of monetization that they're able to basically compete for cash. Another cool thing having to do with retention is that the average Skillz player plays 63 minutes per day, which is incredibly high. The industry standard is 33. Generally, I think, Skillz, if you're a game developer, you're not only competing against other game developers or games that are out on the system, but you're competing against all forms of entertainment. And when we've taken a look at, Netflix and Facebook and how long players are spending on those platforms per day, we're totally comparable. So that's another reason why, coming on and building a Skillz game is something of value. And generally on the monetization side of things, you see that we have, with Skillz, game developers that have a main SKU and then come on and launch a Skillz-powered game. They see, on average, a 24% increase in D3 retention, which is critical. D30 retention, which is critical, and we'll dive into more in part 2 of this webinar. And see an incremental ARPDAU of an increase of 18 cents. And for those that have an existing SKU and don't want to launch a Skillz-powered game that bites into the existing SKU, there's zero impact on the revenue from from ads or in-app purchases or anything of that sort. So we see a lot of game developers that launch a second version of their game, a Skillz-powered version of their game. Cool, and so that kind of concludes a little bit of what we're going to talk about from a competitive gaming perspective. I do want to let you guys know about a really exciting competition that we're hosting right now called Indie Ignite, where essentially you need to fill out a contest form and launch and integrate a game on the Skillz system by December 31st. And if you do so, you'll be entered into the ability to potentially win a $50,000 grand prize. Within that grand prize, $25,000 of UA is going. So you basically, the 3 steps in it are signing up, registering for the contest form, and then integrating the game by December 31st, and then submitting it to the App Store and making sure that goes live by January 31st. So those are the steps. I hope that we see some of you guys register. It's a really exciting competition. It's our first one that we've held of this sort, and we're definitely seeing a lot of interest in it already. But that $50,000 grand prize could be yours. We'll be looking at a number of different factors like game quality and early kind of key performance indicators to choose the grand prize winner. All the information is located on our contest forum, which we'll follow up with you afterwards. And with that in mind, if you want to just quickly let us know if you're interested in learning more about the Indie Ignite Game Developer Competition, then we'll send out the information to you. All right, cool. It looks like a number of you guys are. Awesome. So we'll send that out. Keep an eye out for the email. And I think we have, Lily, we have a couple minutes for Q&A. What do we have from the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Evan, for that content. I think that's really insightful. So we have a few questions from the audience. Hopefully we have time to read them all. But the first one is, can you share experiences with brain teaser, pattern matching, match 3, or puzzle games, and how can such games apply to the esports or the Skillz platform?
Yeah, generally, all 3 of those genres, we have a number of different games that are on the Skillz system. And the good news is if you're thinking about creating one of those games or you have one of those games, it's great for the Skillz network. Generally, all those have pretty short gameplay, which is good for profitability and liquidity on your mobile game. So if you check out our website, we have a number of different case studies that are covering those genres specifically. But I would say it is definitely within our wheelhouse, and you should highly consider launching with Skillz because those are very successful genre types.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Evan. This one's about the Indie Ignite competition. You kind of blew through this a little quickly, but this person is wondering, what does he need to do to qualify for the $50,000 grand prize package for the Indie Ignite competition? If you can just kind of go through the entrance process again.
Yeah, cool, definitely. There are 3 steps. So step 1 is to submit the contest form. Just let us know that you're developing a game. You put in the game title. You can find all the different details on the contest form. It takes just a few minutes to actually fill that out. The second step is going to developers.skillz.com if you don't already have a developer console account, and going through the entire integration process there. So you need to download the SDK, integrate it into your game, set up tournaments, and submit. Once you launch the game, the third part is making sure that the game is accepted into the App Store. By the way, this contest is iOS only, so just be aware of that. And then we'll be looking at early engagement rates to determine that sort of grand prize winner.
Right, cool. Thank you. Another question is going back to the demographics of competitive mobile players. What demographics has Skillz seen has been particularly successful with Skillz?
It's actually really interesting that when we have done sort of a demographic analysis of our user base, it ranges heavily from game to game. So I wouldn't say that there's one particular demographic that is highly interested in Skillz games because the content varies so much. So really, I think we've seen games where it skews a little bit younger, skews a little bit older, different games of socioeconomic backgrounds, different games of genders. It really is kind of all over the place. But generally, for you guys, I think just really thinking about what audience type do you have when you're developing a game is kind of key, so that you can develop a game that you're not starting from scratch from a player acquisition point, and it's in line with what your studio is creating.
Cool. I think we have time for maybe one more question, Evan. I know that fairness and competitive gaming, that's everything about being in a competition, right? So for Skillz, how do we ensure that all of our games are fair?
Yeah, so when you go into the developer console and you are integrating your game, we allow for a self-check so that you guys make sure that the game is fair early on. So this is a manual process that you guys as game developers would check to test out that it's fair. The second stage that we do is that when you are looking, you've launched your game, you've built up some DAO, and you're looking to become cash-enabled, we run it through a fairness check. So we algorithmically, we have a pattern for it, and we determine that the game is fair. It's more than 65% skill-based versus chance-based, and then at that point, that's where we kind of know 100% for sure that the game is fair, and it is a key kind of element to all of our games. We really want all of our games to be fair, so we do take it very seriously. But yeah.
All right, cool. And I think we're just about time for today, but I really want to thank Evan for his time, and to all of our listeners. Here's a few quick notes before we take off. Watch for an email with the link to today's webinar. You can rewatch it, or you can send it to a colleague. And we'll also send out information to the Indie Ignite Game Developer Competition. So I just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of the day to join us. And I just want to say on behalf of Evan and I, have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.